Medical information departments occupy an unusual space in the pharmaceutical ecosystem. They sit squarely on the boundary between clinical communication, answering product queries from doctors and patients, and strict regulatory compliance. Every day, these departments field interactions that contain spontaneous safety data, like adverse events or product quality complaints. Because they feed directly into pharmacovigilance workflows, medical information operations are a highly prized target for regulatory auditors. There is a persistent misconception in the industry about how to survive these audits. Organizations assume that having an exhaustive set of standard operating procedures ensures compliance. It doesn't. Auditors target the implementation gap, the specific friction between what your policy dictates and how the machinery actually performs under stress. They want to know what happens on a random Tuesday afternoon when a complex edge case call arrives, the primary software is lagging, and the senior supervisor is absent. To understand what a rigorous audit entails, we have to deconstruct the entire medical information ecosystem. By tracing the data flow from the central database backbone outward to the pharmacovigilance perimeter, we can identify exactly where these structural breaking points lie. Systemic failures rarely exist in policy documents. They hide in operational stress, which is exactly where an auditor will look. Any structural review begins with the MI database. It serves as the operational backbone of the function. Weaknesses introduced here will cascade through every downstream process. The first test is validation. Auditors will pull the original validation documentation, but they won't stop there. They will test that documentation against the system's actual current functionality, checking for any updates or configuration changes that bypass initial controls. If the system has a history of data migration, the risk profile increases. Migration projects routinely introduce record-level errors, creating inconsistencies between pre- and post-migration periods that often remain uncorrected. Upstream from the database is the call handling platform, where the interaction begins. This software interface must adhere to strict regulatory standards regarding how data is captured and archived. That regulatory mandate requires built-in, consistent call recording, secure retention controls, and the specific fields necessary to capture and document adverse events and product quality complaints during the live interaction. All of this raw input, from physical reference documents to digital audio files, falls under strict source data retention requirements defined by both company policy and regional regulations. Retaining this data is useless on its own. Organizations must have formalized procedures detailing exactly who can access these recordings, under what specific circumstances, and how every instance of access is logged and audited. If the database is unvalidated or the software lacks strict access tracking, the integrity of every piece of safety data is compromised before a human agent even processes it. Once the digital infrastructure is secured, the audit moves to the human operational layer. Medical information staff act as the real-time filters for all incoming clinical inquiries. The defining challenge for these agents is pattern recognition. They must listen to a caller present a routine product question and successfully extract a potential adverse event embedded deep within the details. Providing auditors with a stack of training attendance logs proves nothing about an agent's ability to do this. An auditor will verify comprehension by conducting a scenario-based assessment during the site visit to see if the staff actually understands the threshold for reporting. To pass, the training curricula must be demonstrably current. Records must show that training has been refreshed within the last 12 to 18 months, or immediately following any change to the product labeling. Staff must have immediate, verifiable access to the most current version of that approved labeling at all times. Auditors will probe the edges of this operational knowledge. They will ask agents how they handle a cross-country query regarding an indication that is not approved by the local marketing authorization. If a call comes in using an unlisted language, applying an undocumented machine translation tool introduces severe patient safety risks. Translation methodology in a medical context must be robust, controlled, and formally defined. Operational vulnerabilities also extend to simple human absence. Out-of-office coverage during weekends, public holidays, or unplanned leave must be managed through formal documentation rather than informal agreements between colleagues. This leads into business continuity planning. When the primary call handling system suffers an outage or a vendor goes completely offline, the organization must have a defined, immediate fallback sequence. If those continuity plans have never been stress tested in a live environment, an auditor will classify them as aspirational documents, not functional operational protocols. The human interface breaks down precisely when complex, unpredictable edge cases push the operation past the boundaries of its untested training and continuity plans. Zooming out from internal operations, the audit scope expands to the regulatory perimeter, specifically examining what happens when parts of the medical information function are outsourced to service providers or contract research organizations. There is a dangerous illusion surrounding these arrangements. Contracts can successfully transfer the daily operational workload, but they never transfer regulatory liability. If an external provider receives an adverse event report and fails to escalate it within the mandatory timeframe, the regulatory penalty lands entirely on the pharmaceutical sponsor. Sponsors must prove active oversight of these external operations. A passive clause is not enough. Auditors look for documented site visits, strict KPI reviews, and rigorous deviation tracking. To ensure no data is lost across these boundaries, organizations must execute a mandatory reconciliation process. Data packets flow between the Medical Information Database and the separate Pharmacovigilance Safety Database to verify that the data points match perfectly. Excluding the medical information channel from pharmacovigilance agreements creates a massive structural gap in safety data compliance. The final ledger for all of these interconnected systems is the Pharmacovigilance System Master File. This master file must accurately map and document the entire structure, including any decentralized sites or outsourced operations, to reflect exactly how safety information is governed. A fragmented regulatory perimeter creates unmitigated legal liability for the sponsor, rendering even the most rigorous internal compliance efforts completely useless. The medical information ecosystem is an interconnected flow of queries, personal data, and safety signals. On a stressed Tuesday afternoon, a complex query must successfully navigate vendor controls and human filters until it deposits safely into the pharmacovigilance database. This dynamic flow of data under pressure is what an auditor assesses. They contrast the friction-filled reality of this stress test against the static, idealized rules written in the standard operating procedures. They search for the implementation gaps in three primary areas: the digital integration architecture, the rigorousness of vendor oversight, and human recognition of safety signals. Organizations must actively hunt for and close these specific implementation gaps internally, long before an external regulator arrives to do it for them. Architecting true operational compliance across this data flow is the only reliable method to protect patient safety while securing the organization against total corporate liability.